thought of this part was just to show an application of how we used LFDCS across a very large data set and got a lot of information out of it. And so these are also slides that I haven't talked in a while, so apologies, I'm a little rusty, but we'll go with it. Oh yeah, okay. Oh, that's nice. Sorry. We're playing with the lights in the room for those who can't see. That was good. Okay, so just to get everyone familiar with North Atlantic right whales, in case you're not working with them, they're a highly endangered species that we work very closely with here. There's only about 330 of them left, and they have very low calving rates and poor health, which is contributing to their declining population. Their main threats are ship strike and entanglement. And there's been a lot of research focus following where they do go and knowing when and where they show up in these certain areas. And so the map on the right is showing their typical habitat areas and when and where they're showing up there. So they come down to the southeast for calving, and then most of them or all of them are up feeding in the north waters in the northeast US and Canadian waters. And starting in around 2010, we saw significant changes in their distribution and where they were occurring, but we didn't know where they were changing their distribution to or where they were shifting their occurrence. And so it brought to this huge question of where and how are they shifting and how do we find that out? And then once we were able to answer that question, we were also wondering, what about other species? Are they also shifting? Are they shifting in the same way? And so on and so forth. And so from that, we were able to turn to passive acoustic monitoring. I thought that would be the main way we can look at this answer. And we sent a data call out for anyone who had available acoustic data and got a great response back, and were able to compile a huge data set along the East Coast for any passive acoustic monitoring recordings. I don't think we need that slide. Okay, so this is a list of all the folks that contributed data or were part of this project. It was a huge collaboration, an amazing effort. So thanks to everyone listed here. Data from all over, starting from the Caribbean up to Davis Strait, and just 19 to 20 organizations. So it was a really amazing effort and collaboration. The data came, because of it was coming from so many different people, we had all different goals of initial goals for these projects. So the data was really sparse and spread out and recording at different times from different recorders. This map here is showing all of the locations of recorders where we had some form of data. And so it spanned from 2004 to 2010. And then we have a color coded here with different time periods. So we split the data into this before and after 2010 period to try and see if we could detect changes. So the dots that are yellow are recorders where we had data from before 2010. Dots that are black were where we had data after 2010. And blue are blue dots are recorders where we had data from both time periods. So you can see it's spread, it's different. There are a lot of gaps, but overall we have pretty decent coverage across the coast. We then also split the regions up so that we were able to better kind of translate where we were finding detections and acoustic occurrence. And so this was just how we split it up with different numbers, and we'll see graphs later with the regions corresponding to the numbers, just for easier translation and understanding. This is just to show the spread of where we had data in the different regions. So on the y-axis are the region numbers. So basically number 1 is the northernmost region, spanning down to region 11, which was down in the Caribbean, the southernmost region. And then going along your x-axis is time and split into seasons. So we're starting 2004, going to 2014, within those seasons in there. And the darker the square, the full season of data we had for that region and for that year. And where there's white space, we had no data available for that region or year. So again, overall, you can see it's a pretty decent spread and split in between the two time periods. We're able to get a pretty good picture overall of what's going on. So again, these recorders came from all different folks with different purposes, different recorders and different technologies. So the data we had were from 4 different recorders: the Maru from Cornell University, the HARP from Scripps, the AMAR from JASCO, and the Haru from actually it's the AUH now, I believe, from NOAA PML in Oregon State. So we just learned this in depth, but this is just an overview slide that I stole from Mark way back when. We used LFDCS across all of these platform types, and it was able to work. Mark has written programs to be able to read all of the different recorder files and types and sound files and all that different variation, which we experienced to the maximum, and we're able to apply this. And so just to refresh what we just learned in the last hour, what LFDCS does is it creates a conditioned spectrogram, which you're seeing up top. It then detects those sounds and draws the pitch tracks and classifies those pitch tracks based on a call library. So that's what we're seeing below. And so for us, we further expanded the call library that Mark built, and it has call types for right whales, fin whales, sei whales, blue whales, and humpback whales. And we'll go into a little more of how we did that and specifics of the analysis to help how we fine-tuned it. But overall, we had all 5 species in one round, 2 rounds technically. And so here again, just those are fin whale pulses up top and sei whale down sweeps next to them with their corresponding pitch tracks below. So the call types we were looking to encompass were all of the ones shown here. So for right whales, we have up calls. Humpback whales, we were looking to get song and social calls. And that became very complicated when we were looking at 10 years of data and humpback whale changed their song. So we were able to create a call library that incorporated notes from song from every year. And that seemed to do a pretty good job of capturing humpback whales over time. We have sei whale down sweeps, fin whale 20 hertz pulses, and blue whale A, B, and AB calls. And so for the fin whales and blue whales, we did a second run of the data where we resampled it at a lower sample rate. So we were able to capture blue whale calls and fin whale calls to our, what we thought were at a better capability. And so I'll show you later how we can do that too and look at it that way. The original goal of LFDCS was to be able to run the data through, automatically look at the detection output, and get an idea of how many detections we would need to say that that species was present. And so we started looking at it by subsampling the data across years and regions for each species to verify when they were there. And so what we would do is take hourly presence and look at the subsampled hours and mark whether or not they were detected. So up top, that's yes, there was a true detection, or not detected below where there was a false detection. And on our x-axis is the number of detections per hour. So we were trying to look at the subsampled hourly presence to then understand if we fit a curve to that data, how many number of detections we would need to be a certain percent confident that that species was detected. So we did that for all of these species. The numbers, we looked at how many we needed to be 90% confident. So if we drew a line at 90%, it would tell you the number you needed per hour of detections to know that they're there. So this was okay for fin whales. And then when we looked at the other species, for sei whales, you needed 4 detections in an hour. Blue whales were 12 detections in an hour. Humpbacks jumped up to 136 per hour. And right whales were at about 21 detections per hour. And so these numbers might not seem huge, but when you actually looked at the data set, it didn't really translate to whether or not a species was detected. So especially for, say, blue, humpback, and right whales, we ended up manually verifying all detections, just to be, especially with right whales where you needed so many, you would miss them if you didn't have as many, or you would overestimate their occurrence. So for those species, we manually verified everything. For fin whales, we were able to take that 29 detections per hour to reduce what we looked at, but we then looked at hours where we had 29 or more detections. So we still kept that manual verification in with everything, but we're able to at least reduce how much we were looking at for those. So just to give an idea of how much data we ran through, it was 325 recorders for the right whale analysis. We then were able to apply the same detector output to look at all the other species. And we were able to reduce the number of recorders looking at based on detection ranges. So, but basically 325 to 281 recorders were looked at. We had over 35,000 days of recording. And again, these were all manually viewed for each species. But from that, we were able to pull out manually by verifying those detections that we had 2,500 days with right whales, 6,800 days with humpback whales, 4,000 with sei whales, 10,700 with fin whales, and 2,900 with blue whales. So it was a lot of data. And I should say the reason LFDCS has been so powerful was to go through those recorders. It took about less than a day per recorder to run on average. It depends on how long the deployment was and so on and so forth. But we were able to, I was able to run through and actually analyze it and still graduate. And I think if we didn't have LFDCS where we were able to get all of the species at once, we'd still be running detectors through the data sets. So it was really awesome and saved me a lot. And so just to show some results from it, what we were able to get from right whales, this is showing the number of days per week of presence, and this is over a summarized year. So on the x-axis, we're looking at January through December, and from top to bottom are those regions we labeled. So region 2 is east of Greenland or Iceland, and then down to region 10, which is the southeast. So just kind of north to south to orient you. Basically, we were able to confirm their movements as we thought in seasonality. So they moved northward in the springtime, and we had more acoustic detections down in the winter time in the southeast. But the main thing that really came out of this that we didn't know before were that right whales occurred along the entire coastline in the winter. So we were getting detections everywhere, where before we didn't know that quite so much. So that was really huge. And just to show it spatially on a map, this is what the detections on the recorders themselves. So we could get regional seasonal occurrence, and then from the maps you can look spatially where along the coast are they actually occurring, close to shore or some further off. You can see we are getting a lot of detections on the shelf and not many off, but we also don't have many recorders off the shelf break, so it's really important to kind of think about where we had data and when we had it available. So just showing again, we had right whale detections all along the coast in winter. We still had pretty decent occurrence along the whole coast in spring as well. And then more northern detections in the summer and fall, kind of capping off at Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. And we do have detections on the shelf break. So we did have recorders out there and we did detect them. They were in fewer numbers, but we do still have acoustic detections there. And so then when we were able to look and compare across the two time periods, this is looking at that year summary, but split into the two time periods. So on the left, we're looking at everything before 2010, and on the right, we're looking at everything after 2010. And the regions, again, split from northernmost to southernmost. Region 3 and 4 is Scotian Shelf, Gulf of Maine, Bay of Fundy area. Region 7 is the Nantucket, New York area, so south of New England. Region 8, New Jersey and Virginia, and Region 10, North Carolina, Florida, just to reorient. And the main things that we really saw when we looked at the detection, the acoustic occurrence over time, they decreased in acoustic occurrence in the Scotian Shelf and Gulf of Maine, Bay of Fundy area, which corresponded with what we were seeing. And they were increasing in acoustic occurrence in the mid-Atlantic regions. Okay, so we were able to pull a lot of information out of this. And then from this, we realized that we could then apply that method to the other species as well. And we could look and see where they were occurring. And we already ran the detector, so we already had the data output. We just had to look at it. So just to show you what the other species pulled out, for humpback whales, we had pretty persistent coverage of them in these regions for almost all seasons. Winter, spring, and summer were pretty equal. We did have them where we expected them down in the Caribbean in the winter and spring. And we had a decrease or the least amount of occurrence in the fall, but we did still have humpback whale occurrence. And I should say we were looking at both social and song notes. And so the way the detector worked was it was able to pull any calls that fell into the call library. And so while we had most of this being song exemplars, which we'll look at later, it still pulled out social sounds as well. So that was nice to have it versatile that way. You have a question? Yes.
Was it that you got relatively small flocks there?
Yes.
Is it because the up on the region in the north of the Canadian waters are so big, or they truly just have it?
So the question is, are the dots, because they're less occurrence than the northeast, or is that just the number of days of occurrence? Basically, and it is that they are, it is the hard number of days per season that they're there. So it's not normalized. So we're just seeing a smaller number of days where we had occurrence of humpback whales here. And a lot of it can be, well, a lot of it's because of where they are on the shelf. And, you know, a lot of these other species, we don't see them as often on the shelf in our acoustic recordings in this data set. And you'll see we don't have any recorders really on Blake's Plateau or further offshore. So that's just something to consider when we do look at their occurrence in this data set. We only had really near shore recordings, especially in the southeast. And that was what that last circle was to highlight. For sei whales, we had a occurrence along all of the data in winter. So similar to our other species, we see kind of that spread. We had the most acoustic occurrence in spring and summer north of Cape Hatteras through the Scotian Shelf. And we saw a seasonal trend of movement upwards with acoustic occurrence in the more northern recorders in the fall. Same with humpback whales. We really don't see as much acoustic occurrence in the southeast recorders. And for sei whales, we had the main occurrence at the edge of the top edge of Blake's Plateau, so really before the shelf break. And so it suggests that if we do have sei whales in the southeast regions, they're probably further off the shelf break, or their acoustic behavior has changed. For fin whales, they are ubiquitous. We get them everywhere, kind of all the time. The main decrease in acoustic occurrences in the summertime, but that's likely due to their shift in acoustic behavior. So they're not singing as often. And so the pulse trains that we're using to pick them up may just not be detected as often, or they could be moving too. So there's those caveats as well. And then we really didn't have much fin whale occurrence in the southeast either. But again, where we did see them was mainly on the farthest recorders to the edge, suggesting that they also occur further offshore down here. For blue whales, what was really amazing was actually how much we did pick them up in our data sets, because a lot of our recorders were on the shelf. And you do see them in winter times spread across the whole range as well. And what's also really interesting is they are on the shelf. So you'll see here in the New York and south of New England data sets, we did pick them up on our on-shelf recorders, which was awesome. The fall, we also picked them up as well, just not as much on the shelf. So you'll see all these recorders here don't have any blue whale detections. It's been a while. In winter, again, like the other species, the only place we have blue whale detections are on the furthest most offshore recorders in the southeast, again, suggesting that they're likely occurring further off if we have them down there. So this was just a way to show all of these species at once. So this was, again, from the same detector run, we were able to put everything together and see it in one spot. And the main thing with all of these species that was really interesting was we get a pretty decent spread along the entire coast for winter time. And so this is similar to right whales. We're seeing the species really occur in all of these regions in the winter season, winter months. The only species we had detections in the Caribbean were humpback whales. So this helps our knowledge of what we already knew, but kind of corroborates that. For humpback and fin whales, they occurred pretty continuously in most regions. So we had them detected the most in our data sets. Sei whales showed the most seasonal movements, where we saw acoustic occurrence pick up in the more northern regions and then trickle back down to the southern regions in wintertime. And blue and fin whales had the highest decrease in occurrence in summer months. And this is likely due to their change in acoustic behavior, which we know happens. And so we were looking for specific calls, and this can often show that as well. And then the region with the most occurrence was region 7, which is the New York region. So mid-Atlantic area, kind of. where you're getting the highest amount of mostly continuous occurrence for humpbacks, say, and fin whales throughout the year. And so Mark mentioned misdetection rates, and we did do this for all of our data sets. So what we did was for each species, we'd go through a subsample of data manually, not through the detection. So look through the spectrogram and look to see when and where we heard them and compare that to what the detector found to get misdetection rates. And we did this on a daily presence scale. So what we did in all of those data sets, we're looking at daily presence. So it's not necessarily how well does the detector pick up every call, but how well does it pick the species up if they're calling on that day so that we can know that they're there. And for our purpose to go through all of that data and for our management needs, that's really the level that we were looking at. And so for these species, the detector actually worked far better than I was expecting, no offense.
No,
The blue whale misdetection rate was 10%. So again, that's missing 10% of days where they occur in the data. Fin whales were also 10%. Humpback whales were actually only 5%. And this, I think, was the biggest shock, but amazing. And sei whales were 14%. And we did do it for right whales as well. And the misdetection rate was actually 33% for right whales, which kind of falls in line with what you would expect as well with their variability in behavior. The one thing about this is this was a subsample of data. So we picked several recorders from different regions, from different years to hopefully get a good spread of it, but we didn't do everything. And so, you know, ideally you would want to go through every recorder portion of it in some way to get a better idea. And what we really found with the detector and with this spread of data, different types, different years, different places, is that it really behaved differently. So for sei whales, that logistic regret, the curve where I showed how many detections we could pull to automatically assume they're there, it worked actually really well in the Northeast. If we were to do that method, it would have been fine. But when we then looked at the Southeast, it didn't work as well. And so that kind of was where that mishap happened. And then we had to start looking at everything manually. So it's important to note that different places, different recorders, different conditions are going to have an effect, and you have to really evaluate it accordingly, not just do one thing and assume it's going to apply well to everything else, much as we would love it to. And so these were both published, in case you want more details. The main thing, and we'll do a little more later, is also talk about our different, what we use to evaluate daily presence. And so we have kind of a shared methods that we've been using for all of our species, acoustic detection, acoustic presence, daily presence analysis. And we've applied these to all of our data since to have a consistent way of analyzing and getting information that way. And it's different to our real-time system, but not too, we have similar overlap in how we determine daily presence of a species. And so we'll go through both of those in a little bit. Well, that's it for now. I think I had another way just to look at right whale presence. This is kind of our fun, flashy picture of showing occurrence cycling through months. So it's just a cool way to see the movements in such a large data set summarized from detector output. And so where you have the bright red colors, where we have the most acoustic occurrence for that month. And so you can really see the movements and seasonality of them through this data set over 10 years. Pretty powerful. So you can see them start to move down back in the fall, and then now we're in winter, and they occur along the entire coastline. Oh, yeah.
Well, great.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Questions?
Yeah, does anyone have any questions? Yeah. Do we know? Yeah, so the question is, do we know if right whales all go down to the Southeast, or are they staying somewhere else, or what do we know? In the past, a lot of the population went down to the calving grounds, but when things started to shift, we didn't see that as much. So now we typically see the pregnant females or reproductive females coming down. And then the question was, where are the rest of the whales and the rest of the population? And so I think the answer is still no, we don't really know. But we are seeing from this that they are occurring acoustically along the entire coast. And what we'll show later with the real-time systems is we're currently getting them everywhere. And so that's been occurring since January, December, January, every year. And now with all of the real-time systems, you can see at that time where they are. So they're everywhere in the winter, it seems. And we've got slow zones all over. We'll go into that more later. But yes.
Or females in the south.
So the question is, are males and females everywhere, or the females in the south and then everywhere? That's also a great question. We don't really know that. The thing about upcalls is they are made by all sexes. So we're able to get, what's great about it is you're getting most of the population whenever you're hearing calls. You don't have to worry about it being segregated to males only, like in the case with a lot of our other calls. So we don't know. But
From the aerial surveys, we know it's a lot of females that are going to have calves. And of course, there haven't been many females having calves in the right whale population. So it's been pretty sparse down in the southeast of late compared to maybe in the 2000s. So. But males will go down there as well.